Hi everyone, Ms. Song here. In this video, I'm going to be going through your surprise effort grade assignment. It should be on a case study about whether globalization of the fashion industry is beneficial. Okay, so you include sources like these. You will either have the hard copy, which was distributed earlier this week, or the soft copy on your respective Google Classroom. Either is fine. What I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to go through the questions and also some of the sources. Hopefully, this will help you to better understand the sources and you can respond to the questions a little bit better. For my classes, the questions that I would like you to specifically work on will be questions 3, which is a comparison question between sources C and D, and question 4, which is a surprise question on source E. Okay, but so let's take this part by part. Whenever you get your question paper, the first thing that you should do is to analyze the questions and figure out what is the main skill that's being tested. So for example, if I'm looking at question 1, what can you learn from this source about the multinational corporations, or MNCs for short? I will immediately remember this is going to be my inference question. That's the main skill that's being tested. For question 2, what's the purpose? This one's quite clear, purpose, skill. Now, question 3, they also tell you this is a comparison because you see the word similarity. Okay, so you can either say that the sources are similar, or you can say that they are different, or both. And recall, we can compare the content, we can compare the purpose of the source, and finally you can compare the tone of the source. Generally, for my classes in particular, I will only recommend that you focus on these two, content and purpose. For question 4, it's obviously a surprise question. And just to recap, how would you answer a surprise question? There are two main ways. The first way you answer is via a cross-reference. What do we mean by cross-reference? It means that I'm going to cross-reference, or I'm going to check against another source. If the source says something similar in content, then I would not be surprised. Okay, because that's what I would expect to see based on a comparison. But if there's a difference in content or contradicting content, then I am surprised. Now, obviously, if you have to do a cross-reference, it means that you need to understand more than just one source, more than just source E. You need to be able to cross-reference to other sources in the case study. So source A, source B, source C, source D, whichever one has a matching content. That's for your cross-reference. The other way to answer a surprise question is to analyze the provenance, or what is the origin or the details about the source, and try to infer its purpose. Okay, so if the provenance or the person who's creating the source says something that's expected of the person's position, maybe he's the boss of a company or maybe he's an employee, then you will be surprised. Okay, sorry, you won't be surprised. If it's expected, you're not surprised. If it's not expected, you'll be surprised. Okay. So in other words, there are two main ways to answer a surprise question. Just to recap, first is the cross-reference, and second is the provenance or purpose. Now, the fifth question, this is what we'll be going through on Friday. If you remember, this is called the assertion question. Oops, sorry. This is your assertion question. Now, what is an assertion? An assertion is a question where there's a certain claim or certain statement that is being made. In this case, they ask you how far do the sources in the case study, meaning they don't specify which particular source. You can use any of the sources. In fact, you're encouraged to use about 4. How far do the sources in the case study show that globalization of the fashion industry is beneficial? This is the assertion. Other terms that your teachers might have used is the view or the claim. What I would like you to do as a routine is whenever you read your questions, go straight to question 5, identify what are the possible views, and draw this simple table on your handout. Okay, so in the left column, you can write show. And what does it mean to show? It means that fashion industry from globalization is beneficial. In the second column, you write does not show. What does that mean? It means that it shows that it does not benefit. Okay, then as we go along through the different sources, you're gonna fill in this table. Maybe you write, as you read source A, you might say that, oh, okay, it is globalization of the fashion industry is beneficial, you write there. But maybe if you read source B, it shows that it does not benefit, you write source B. So on and so forth as you go through the different sources. You come back to page 1 to fill up this table. This is going to be very important and very helpful when you write your assertion practice answer. Okay. With that in mind, now I'm going to go through the background information. As I go through the background information, write and highlight whatever I highlight. Okay. So top of the question, this is a repeat of your assertion question. So is the globalization of the fashion industry beneficial? So there are two views here. One is that it's going to be beneficial. And the other possible view that you might see in the sources is not beneficial, or in fact, it might be harmful. So, what does this say? Globalization of the fashion industry has brought much benefits. For example, the advancements in technology in the form of social media has increased consumer choices of fashion, meaning the people who are buying fashion clothes, they get more choices that are available to them. They can see more variety. How is this achieved? It's through social media influencers. So I'm going to highlight this first sentence. This is going to be my first benefit that the background information has been telling me about. Okay. In addition, multinational corporations, MNCs such as Nike, are selling their products at more attractive prices. Okay, what does this mean? It means that they're selling it at cheaper prices for consumers as they continue the strategy of setting up factories in less developed countries for lower labor costs. This has resulted in large employment of factory workers in these countries. Okay, so this is another benefit. Okay, increased employment, more jobs, more income for these workers. So far, it seems that there are a lot of benefits. What else does the background information say? It says, however, these forces of globalization on the fashion industry have also resulted in negative impacts. Okay, so I'm going to highlight this in a different color, such as the overconsumption of fashion goods, which result in wastage. Overconsumption means buying more than necessary. More than necessary. And so this is a negative impact, or a harmful, not beneficial impact. There are also concerns about the poor working conditions, poor working environment, and the low pay in these garment factories set up by the MNCs, which are often known as sweatshops. Okay, so this is another negative impact. So right off the bat, when we read the background information, we are already starting to get clues of what we might expect to see in the different sources. So it's very important, just spend about 2 minutes, always read through the background information, just take quick notes as we go along. Okay, this is going to help you to be a little bit more focused when you look through the sources. At this stage, what we're going to do is to go through source A and the rest of the sources, so just identify the main points. So we start off with the provenance of source A. It tells us source A is an extract published in an online article about MNCs setting up factories in less developed countries. Now, this is what it says. More than 4 million people work in Bangladesh's garment industry, which now accounts for more than 80% of the country's foreign trade. Oh my goodness. Okay, so this tells you more than 4 million people work there, and it accounts for 80% of the country's foreign trade. What does this mean? It means that for 4 million of these people, these factories that have been set up by companies like Nike or Uniqlo, for example, they are giving more jobs to locals. And as a result of more jobs, you have greater income. And in fact, it's so important to the country. Okay, it's important in the country because you realize 80% of the foreign trade is based on these factories. Okay, many MNCs such as Walmart, whatever Primark is, and other Western brands have located their factories in Bangladesh because of the low labor costs. So far, if I were to only read this first paragraph, it seems like there are plenty of benefits. But let's move on. The increasing demand for cheaper clothes from high street stores and supermarket chains in the West is keeping workers' wages at levels as low as $68 a month, an amount that even some employers admit is barely enough, especially when the workers have been working long hours with much sweat and hard work. Okay, so there are several parts to this, right? So we see, what are the working conditions? They work long hours with much sweat and hard work. Okay, so that's a very, very tough job. But what's worse is that their wages, how much money they earn, is just $68 a month. That's barely enough to survive. So, if I were to read this section of the paragraph, I'm going to get the sense that these sweatshops or these the globalization of fashion industries, in this case, is very negative because the people are getting underpaid and they're getting overworked. Okay, that's for source A. Let's move on to source B. Source B, if you recall from the question paper, is going to be your purpose question. Okay, purpose question. A purpose question often requires you to infer from the provenance, so you read from these details, who might be the author. Sometimes the author is named, sometimes the author isn't named, and try to figure out who is the likely audience, meaning who is probably going to see this post, because that's going to affect your intended outcome or action taken. So let's read this together. A cartoon published by an online blog by an individual who raised many concerns about sweatshops in less developed countries. Okay, so here's the tricky part, right? If it's an online blog, it is not very clear who the specific audience is. Okay, so you might just leave it as international audience, or when you're reading or analyzing the source, you might get a sense who are the specific people they are targeting. So there might be specific audiences that are targeted. That means this cartoon is trying to address these few people. So let me see. So in this picture, I see several things, right? So I see in the left section, I see the MNC boss who says he sees low labor costs. Okay, that's one person. Another person we see, the mall shopper who only sees cool and cheap clothes. That's what they are looking at. And then the final person is the poor child who works in the sweatshops, who sees money, but it's just enough for dinner. So there are three different people being shown here. Okay, the boss, the shopper, and the poor child working in the sweatshops. You can try to start to infer, what does this show you about the impact of the globalization of the fashion industry? Is it a positive impact? Is it a negative impact? And why? But in any case, you might try to identify who is my audience. If my audience is the MNC boss, what might be my intended outcome? It could be about criticizing the boss for only thinking about low labor costs, not thinking about the treatment of his workers, or it could be about pressuring the boss to try to make the working conditions slightly better. Alternatively, if you think that this mall shopper is your main audience, then you could be thinking about purposes like raising awareness. Oftentimes, consumers and shoppers like you and I may not be fully aware of how the workers are being treated. As a result, we buy these products without thinking too much about how we could be improving their circumstances. Okay, so that's for source B. Let's move on to source C. It's from an article published in an online magazine on fashion and culture. Social media is best known for its ability to connect people around the world and share information instantly. Okay, so how does this affect fashion? One way this affects the fashion world is by speeding up the rate at which fashion trends come into style. Okay, what does this mean? This means that because of things like, for example, YouTube or TikTok, you can just go over to these social media outlets and you get to see many different fashion trends come in and out almost instantaneously. Okay? Fashion hauls, okay, so fashion hauls, this is a description, is a video where people show off the items that they purchase, which are typically in video format on YouTube or TikTok, have been influencing the buying habits of consumers. Okay, so how has watching these videos affected what consumers do, what the shoppers do? Okay, hauls are ways for creators to try on, review, and show off large quantities of clothing at once. Okay, that sounds pretty good. However, while this can be helpful, hauls can also encourage overconsumption and poor buying habits. As a result, young people are influenced to value quantity over quality in their clothing. So we are seeing several things in this paragraph, right? First thing, we are seeing the impact of social media. Okay, this could be good, could be bad. It speeds up the fashion trends. On the negative side, we start to see that these actually encourage overconsumption, meaning we buy more than we actually need. Now, that seems to be a problem, that seems to be a harmful impact of globalization of the fashion industry. Okay, now what do we see in source D? Are we going to see something similar? Are we going to see something different? Because we recall, source C and source D are your comparison sources. Source D is from an article published by the Fashion Network, a network and marketing platform. Marketing means they want to advertise, platform for fashion retail professionals. There's an ongoing discussion among people of the internet that teenagers today look much less awkward than they used to. Okay, much less awkward is another way of saying you don't look so bad. Your fashion sense isn't so horrible now. Now, why is this? This is in part because they have more examples of how to be fashionable and are given access to fashion hacks that show they don't have to be rich to have style. Okay, so this looks like a very positive impact. Okay, more examples. So because of social media or because of the internet, they can learn how to be fashionable. So let's see what it was like in the past. In the past, while the teenagers in the past anxiously waited for fashion magazines to arrive in the mail, today's youths know that they don't have to have access to exclusive content, meaning content that you have to purchase through the magazine in order to be fashion conscious. That means aware of the fashion trends, what looks good, what doesn't look good. Social media, you see, this is another part where social media comes out, similar to what we saw in source C. It's full of little tricks and tips on how to stay fashionable in an affordable way. So this also looks like a positive impact of social media, of fashion trends going online. So remember, we want to compare sources C and source D. You can either compare the content, purpose, or tone. Finally, let's move on to source E. Okay, source E. And this is the source that we'll be analyzing for our surprise question. Okay, and recall for surprise, once again, two ways. One is you cross-reference, you find another source which has matching content, find it whether it's similar, then you'll be not surprised. If it's different, then you're surprised. The other way is you analyze the provenance or purpose. Okay, so let's look at this provenance. It says, an extract of an interview by Nike's Vice President of Corporate Responsibility. What's the meaning of corporate responsibility? Okay, so two parts. Corporate means it's like the business, and responsibility means what are the rules that you should follow as a company. Every company nowadays, they have this thing called corporate responsibility, or it's also called social responsibility, which describe the things that this company should or should not do. Okay, so this is by an interview with the Nike Vice President, where one of her duties is to make sure that Nike's manufacturers observe the company's labor standards. In your mind, you should already be slightly suspicious of this. Okay, there are two ways of looking at this position. On the one hand, if this person is the vice president, then she might be knowledgeable about the actual practices. Okay, because she is the expert authority, she's the one who should know most about Nike. And if you think that this is what is known about her vice presidentship, then you might think that she's a reliable source. On the other hand, you might think, hey, this is Nike's vice president. Nike is one of the MNCs which was being criticized for its treatment of workers. Perhaps you might think that there might be an agenda to hide the truth, in which case you might be thinking she is an unreliable source. Okay, so there are possible ways you can analyze the provenance, and let's try to figure out what might be her purpose here, looking at the content. So this is what she says. In the early 1990s, Nike moved into the center of a major storm. Okay, meaning it became heavily criticized around the world around the issue of sweatshops and working conditions in the global supply chains. This means that Nike was criticized all around the world because apparently the people working in their sweatshops had very poor working conditions. This is what Nike says. We've employed a large number of people in Nike factories in Indonesia, China, and other low-wage countries. We were one of the first brands to be targeted by non-governmental organizations or NGOs in their efforts to raise public awareness around these issues. So here, what she's doing, she is admitting that there was a problem with Nike. She admits that in the early 1990s, hey, we also discovered that maybe we haven't been treating our workers very well. But that was in the 1990s. Let's try to figure out what this vice president is going to say next. She says, we have done a lot of work to understand the causes of excessive overtime. So Nike, after being criticized, they have tried to figure out what has caused the problems like excessive overtime. We discovered that one of the root causes is that designers are late in handing their product designs over to the factories. Oh, okay. So who is responsible for the overtime in the factories? This vice president is blaming it on the designers. Then she goes on to say, this resulted in the workers being asked to do excessive overtime workers in order to complete the task. Having explained this to our designers have resulted in less excessive hours at the factories. You should be thinking, maybe this sounds a little bit suspicious. So, what are some things that we see here? The first thing we see in this source is, yes, they admit problems or poor treatment of workers. Poor treatment of workers. Okay. Next, we also see the vice president blaming the problems, the main root cause, on these fashion designers. It is their fault. Maybe they give their designs so late, but they expect the workers to produce it so quickly. See, it's their fault. And the third thing we see is that Nike has done something about this. Done something to solve the problem. To deal with problem. What have they done? They've tried to explain to their designers that these are the issues. Okay, so you might want to think in your mind, are you surprised by any one of these points? Are you surprised by the fact that there were poor treatment of workers? Meaning, for example, if I cross-reference to any of the other sources A, B, C, or D, can I find another source that shows me that workers are treated poorly? If so, then the content is similar and you will not be surprised. Alternatively, if you find another source that shows that workers are treated very well, then you will be surprised because it's a contradicting content. Okay, that's one way. The second thing, are you surprised that the vice president of Nike is blaming the designers? Meaning, it is not Nike's fault. It's actually the fashion designers. And are you surprised that this vice president is saying that she has done something to deal with the problem? Okay? If you are surprised, it means that she is saying something that you wouldn't expect. Okay, then you can write that. Okay. Now, we have, in this video, once again, what have we done? We have covered all the 5 sources. Hopefully, this gives you a head start to answer the questions. Just a reminder for my classes, I want you guys to be working on question 3 and 4. I'll be collecting this from you guys on Friday. Thank you.